So guys, I'm here to talk about FTD. So you can go to ftd.dev and presentation link is right there. So FTD is a programming language that we have created. So at Shobit have been working on this language called FTD. It's short for Fifth Try Document. It's a programming language that we have created to solve the kind of problem that Trinka was just talking about. It's like if you want to come into front end or if you want to design a page, right? It's really, really hard. And if you expect a non-programmer to design a page, it's just virtually impossible, right? Like the previous talk, I think almost is a complete testament for how programming is really, really hard. Like CSS, JavaScript, the framework, madness. Uh, basically the learning curve is really steep, and then we thought, how do we kind of solve it, and that's roughly the main motivation. To give you some context, for example, this presentation itself is done in FTD, right? So FTD is a programming language which compiles to JavaScript, HTML, CSS, but currently that is the current state of affair. We do plan to also compile to, let's say, Android or iOS native, or maybe even a terminal. So for example, you can write a N curses or whatever the terminal UI application in FTD, right? So we want to kind of create a full-blown UI language for virtually all. So one of the actual motivation was also what is called embedded systems. So if you look at the problems with front-end development today, one is the learning complexity, right? So it's extremely hard to learn. The other is also the actual load, right? So for example, this presentation, if you see fully downloaded, is about, how do we find out? So this has the main page. Let me just show you locally. So this entire presentation is so 236K, right? And this is ungzipped. And if you gzip this file, right? So as you can see, the gzip version of this presentation, which includes the entire CSS, JavaScript, everything, is 20 kilobytes, right? So we believe that currently we have these two problems. It's too hard to learn, and also the system resources required to power a typical, let's say, React website or whatever website is just too much, right? In 20 KB, full application is kind of almost unthinkable, right? Like if you talk about realistic applications. So so this is what FTD has been like. So today, when it comes to authoring content, right? So if you generally think about writing something, right, that normal human beings can kind of use to give slightly better than. So today you have either Google Docs or all those WYSIWYG editors, which basically are not really great for you because you're kind of completely tied to that particular platform, right? So you either tied to Google Docs or Word, and they are famous, for not interoperating with each other. So what is the language that human beings should use, right? It can't be Word. The human being answer can't be. Markdown has tried, and it is actually a massively successful language. In its simplicity, today, we kind of believe that very soon, if you look at it, both WhatsApp and Telegram support limited Markdown, in their text input. So basically, today, probably billions of people are writing Markdown without knowing about that, right? So if you look at the forwards that you see, you will see a lot of funky annotations, markup that you're not aware of it, but it's being used in some syntax almost like Markdown. So Markdown is really great. But the problem is that Markdown is extremely simplistic. You can argue that's the strength of Markdown, but I believe that there's a really, really huge gap between, let's say, Markdown and, let's say, today React and JavaScript and stuff. So if you have to create a web page, if you look at most of the static site generators, right, they give you Markdown. But if you want to enhance it, you have to immediately go to CSS and JavaScript. And that's an extremely huge jump from the simplicity of Markdown to the complexity of JavaScript and CSS and so forth. Right. So we believe that something between Markdown and the JavaScript world should be possible, and that's where we. So today, if you look at today MDX, right? So I don't know if in the React world, a lot of people must be using Docusaurus, for example, right? So it's kind of lets you write Markdown content, but along with it, you can instantiate React components, right? So this is pretty great, and this seems like the current best answer, right, that we have for if you want to do something more than Markdown. It's like, unfortunately, it's not something, it's like massively more than Markdown, because you again have to go to React world, right? So, and despite that, despite this, like, for example, let's say you see in this code snippet, they are using this year, which is whatever, 2018 in this text block, right? But how do you, let's say you wanted to show it in yellow, how do you do that? There's absolutely actually no answer in MDX, right? So something as simple as highlighting some text snippet, right, is kind of virtually like impossible territory in MDX, right? You have to kind of go to full on giving up on this text and writing completely in React, right? And you effectively, React is, JSX is very successful, but ultimately JSX syntax is exactly HTML syntax. And you can say that the Markdown is a proof that people hate writing HTML, right? If HTML was so great and people so loved it, they would not have created Markdown. So Markdown exists because people hate writing HTML. And so MDX, in my opinion, in the way I've seen MDX used in Wild is that it's used for very, very limited, stuff. So it's not really a good alternative. It's definitely, I don't believe MDX is the future human answer. Okay, oh my God, the whole world should be writing MDX. I don't believe it's that kind of technology, right? Similarly, it becomes really, really complex, like MDX, which is about text. You don't know if this particular thing will be rendered as Markdown or not, right? You can't find that out without reading the source code of this particular thing or reading the documentation. Syntax is also such that if you have to write multi-line text over here, you again have to use backslashes, and it just, almost complete torture, right? If you wanted to write a multi-line string over there, right? And further, can that text itself contain MDX? Nobody knows, right? It's kind of a not really thought through solution, right? So let's look at FTD, right? So this is the syntax that we have come up with, right? So it starts with this dash dash. Then there is something. This can be, let's say if you are familiar with JSX, this can be treated as you're instantiating a component called hello, and you're passing this parameter called who to this particular. What is there interesting to notice is that we don't have to use this double quotes, right? So it sounds like a small thing, but it's if you are trying to teach programming to someone who doesn't know programming, explaining just how to quote a string is torture, right? Like you'll probably give up, especially if you're going to go to multi-line strings soon, right? So it becomes really complex really soon. And so here, this is the same example. Here we are trying to show you how this hello component is internally implemented, right? So in this talk, we are not really going to look at how to create a FTD component that will expand the scope too much. We'll just look at the whole language at a very superficial. We are just going to browse through the language. How does it look like, right? So in this case, this is this component. The definition of this hello, right? is itself in FTD. So unlike in the previous example where I showed you this, the definition of this chart was in some other library, right? So somewhere snowfall.js, and people have to learn a totally different language. Here, the component usage and the component definition is in both FTD. So here we are creating a row, right? So basically, this is the UI that you want to create, right? So you want to show hello and then some sort of parametric, right? So we want to show world or something else. So here we are defining that component. So the component, the syntax we have tried to create is again, like we are trying to aim for human beings. So we have not used, let's say, indentation. And we have also not used, let's say, curly brackets, right? These are really hard. Like if you're trying to learn programming, just getting this right in the early days is torture, right? So we are trying to kind of remove, we don't have double quotes, right? And yet we have proper types, right? So unlike JavaScript, FTD supports types. So for example, in this case, because I have defined who as a string. So because I've defined it as a string, my parser knows that this is a string, right? So if you, virtually anything is accepted, but if you would have defined it as an integer or another data type, FTD would have rejected that program saying this is integer can't have, let's say, hello or whatever. So here we are trying to create a component, and as you can see, we have defined types. We can use variables, right? So we have defined this variable and we are referring to this variable. We have created a subset of CSS. So we have taken CSS. We have actually, like among the 3-4 of us, we have gone through the CSS spec and all the CSS attributes commonly used, right? And we have kind of like figured out what is kind of the minimum set of CSS that we believe should be able to emulate most of the website, right? And it's modern. So I believe CSS is like CSS 1, 2, 3. It's like, it's just extremely overly complex, right? Somebody saying, yeah, I know CSS is just, I don't know of anybody who can say they know CSS, like 1, 2, 3, and the whole thing. It's just too complex. Everybody knows a subset of CSS, and it's just, in my head, not really needed. So what we have figured out is created is a subset of CSS. We have taken a huge amount of inspiration from CSS itself, but we have actually expanded on it, right? So we'll again not go into that. So here we have used two of the CSS attributes, spacing. So the spacing decides the space between these two elements. So in this case, this is a container. This container contains 2 children, right? So you see there are 2 dashes and 3 dashes. So this is the limit of it. There's no 4 dash. So we actually had to, that's another thing that today, while even if you can learn, let's say, JavaScript, even if you're fluent with JavaScript and so forth, if I give you a general text input, let's say, for example, if I give you a Gmail compose button, and if I ask you to write JavaScript there, that is almost complete torture for you, right? So you cannot write JavaScript, even if you know JavaScript, without using again, a very complex editor, right? So that's like if the goal is for human beings to learn some programming, right? Asking them to install this complex editor and configure it and blah, blah, I believe is just not. And if you are building any application which takes input from users, right, which happens to be FTD, right? So you will have to provide them a first-class text editor which supports indentation and stuff. Here we have tried to remove indentation and curly brackets because we believe you cannot deal with curly brackets and indentation without a first-class text programming editor, right? So just to talk about the simplicity, if you look at the 2 programs, right, just look at this portion. So we have a data type called caption, which is basically nothing but an alias for. So if you look at it, how it looks like, there's a dash dash, then there's a kind of a section name till colon, right? And then there is something which comes after, right? So here you see this hello comes after dash 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 and something and colon. So this particular thing is called a caption, right? So in a lot of programs, it makes your code look very neat. And this different kind of matters, right? When you're talking about writing stuff, this is prettier, right? So that's how we have been kind of designing, like it's like a programming language like no other language, like it's a totally brand new kind of thing. So here in this case, we're defining a variable. So integer, so the size variable, for example, is integer, right? And the value of this variable is 42. A message, right? You define a variable called message whose value is this. As you can see, based on the type, we know we don't have to code things. We use dollar to refer to variables. Right? So here, for example, this particular thing, this is the output of this. So not just basic types, you can define your own record, which is almost like a JSON object or a class or whatever you call it. So here I'm defining a record called person. It takes 3 attributes. It takes name, let's say company. So I want for every person, I want to store the name of the person. I want to store the company of that person. And I want to take an optional bio of that person, right? So all 3 of them are strings, but I've given these to caption and body as types instead of string, so that people can write this code, right? So here you're defining this record, and here you're creating an instance of that record. So you're creating a variable of type person. The name of the variable is Amit. This is the caption area, so it goes to the name, right? So caption comes till the end of the first line. So if your name was really longer, you'll have to use slightly different syntax. There's a continuation we'll talk about, but this is how you decide whether you want something to be caption or not. Right? If something is caption, it fits in the first line. It is completely possible to have multi-line stuff. All sorts of complex stuff are possible. So we've actually really looked at Elm, we have looked at Rust. We've kind of so there's very little things you cannot do. Obviously, this is not meant for you to create your Gmail in it, right? So it's more like it's for creating a web page for you, right? It's like there's a difference between in the complexity, right? Like so if you want to have a application with thousands of people, developers collaborating on it, maybe FTD is not for you, right? But if you are creating a web page, consider a homepage of most websites, right? So that need not be done in React technically. What are you getting by creating your homepage or a landing page in React? Like there's nothing really functionality wise. It's just a wrapper. You don't want to write HTML, so you write React or whatever. So I believe this is slightly better. I'll show you some more examples. So this is kind of neat, right? And obviously you can use this data in the UI subsequently. In this case, I am creating a list, right? So here I've created a variable called people. The type of people is person list. So it's a list of people, a list of persons called people. Here we are creating 2 instances and storing those instances in this people list, right? So by default, this list is empty, and then we are adding. So if you remember, the bio was optional. So in this case, I have not provided the bio. I have provided the caption, which gets mapped to name, and then I have provided company, and I have not provided bio. But in this case, let's say I have provided the caption, I have provided the company, and I have provided a bio, right? It can be any multi-line. So writing multi-line string is really, really easy, right? As it should be for a, because bulk of the stuff we are writing is prose. Here we are iterating over a variable. So here the list, right? So we are looping over the list. So this show person is a component, let's say, defined. I'm not showing the body of it. We are going to iterate over it. So we are going to create n instances of this show person, right? Virtually internally. And we are going to, so this is the list that we are iterating over, and this is the variable that we are binding it to. So we can also do conditional stuff. So for example, let's say you only wanted to show all those people who have a bio, right? Where for whom bio is not null, right? So you can use this if, right? So if is there is event handling. So for event handling, so here for example I have defined this variable Boolean, and I'm basically saying this text, you can see me, is only to be shown when this variable is true, right? So I put if condition there, and I have this, I have this text where if you click on this event, when click event happens on this particular text, we execute this particular action which toggles this variable, which happens to be this. And as soon as you toggle this variable, this will kind of go away, right? So as you can see, this again, entire presentation is done in FTD, and you can see the source very soon, right? You can also choose to either, so in the previous case, we used if to just not show something if the condition of not matching. But you can also choose to change some property, right? So, here I am basically passing this funky background color true only when funky is true, right? So this attribute is, so you can kind of see the behavior of this particular button, right? So just consider this particular. So we'll take a look at a slightly more complex application. So consider this is the FPM. So FTD is actually two projects. We have created two projects. FTD is a language that I just showed you. FPM is a sister project, which basically is a static site generator, right? So if you write FTD files, like for example, I've been writing FTD files here, right? So where does how do I use this, right? So you can use this tool called FPM, right? So you can do FPM Build, and it builds all the files and it converts everything to JavaScript, right? So this entire site, like including this dark mode, for example, right? So this site is fully done in this thing. So it supports mobile optimizations and so forth, right? So as you can see here, the image itself is changing, right? So as you can see, it's pretty interesting, cool. So this is the kind of stuff you would want to build in FTD, not like Gmail. So let's look at the kind of source code to see. This is so far, those were like dumbing this thing, but this is the actual source code of this page, right? So this page that you see, this entire page is rendered from this source, right? So this is the entire source code of this page. So we have this import syntax. You can import packages. So you can import. So you can write your stuff into multiple packages. And here we are importing everything as FT. There's some configuration which defines some common stuff. There's some other package that I need. This ft.page is a component which sets up this entire page, including the header, the footer, and so forth. Then create section. So this section that you see, this section, this white area, this section is here, right? Then we have this breadcrumb. So as you can see in this page, we have this breadcrumb. So this breadcrumb data is part of that. It contains two links. So as you can see that. Then we have this template list, which shows all these templates in left to right, in a row fashion. So here we have used if. So as you can see, this is quite easy for me. The way I changed this is I copied the same code block twice, and I used a different image in both cases, and I added it to the dark mode. So depending on the value of the dark mode, this is either visible or not visible, right? So this entire page right, is pretty. So the idea is that when I'm talking about a programming language for human being and people writing FTD and program, most people like, what are you talking about? Why would non-developers write code, right? Because we have actually created a world in which writing code or writing this kind of thing is virtually impossible, right? Like if I asked you to create this and asked, let's say, you to take a non-developer friend of yours or family member of yours and ask them to learn this, do it in React, etc., it would be really, really a lot of work. Whereas So for example, this page that I'm showing you, this Ganga imaging site, this was done by my designer, who basically this is the source of that, right? So my designer learned this entire FTD. He has zero prior, he never wrote even a single line of HTML, and he learned the whole thing in about 2 to 3 weeks, right? And afterwards, like, he's just learning best practices and stuff. But he was able to replicate this, create this entire site in 2 to 3 weeks, right? And with absolute zero programming experience. So so that's the idea. Key people are writing a lot of content, and it's not just programmers who are being paid, but everybody's creating a web page. So consider, let's say somebody wanted to create this architecture diagram, right? Like, if I ask you to create it, you'll suddenly go for a SaaS solution. It's like human beings are deprived of technology that they can use to build this kind of simple thing. They are forced to use SaaS solutions, and SaaS solutions are just, ephemeral, just coming and going. You have no idea what SaaS would be surviving after 10 years from now. You will probably most likely lose everything that you've written in most of the 2020s by 2030, because the company that you wrote it with will go away. That's why we created this to be completely, so it's completely open source, you can use it. So consider this image, this cartoon, right? Like, how do you create a cartoon with, this is just very, very hard. Like, everybody creates a UI and so forth. So anyway, so this is this is FTD in short. You can create more complex apps here. Like, for example, you're creating this kind of, so there is actually it's really under development right now. But the idea is that very soon you'll be able to completely replicate most of the UI. So thank you for listening. I would love to reach out and talk to you guys. If you guys have any questions, I'm available on Twitter. You can mail me on amityu@fftd.com. This ftd.slide is available on ftd.dev. So you can just easily reach out.